The fluorescent lights of St. Mary's Hospital operating room buzzed overhead as Dr. Patricia Chen made the first incision. Elena Martinez-Chen lay on the surgical table, her body numb from the epidural, but her mind racing with fear and hope. After 2 failed attempts at natural labor over 36 hours, her twin girls needed to come out now. And her heart monitor was showing irregular patterns that made the medical team move with urgent precision. Marcus Chen stood just outside the OR in his designer suit, his phone pressed to his ear, his voice low but audible through the partially open door. "Baby, I know the timing is terrible, but I can't keep lying to her. Yes, I'm at the hospital right now. The C-section just started. I'll tell her as soon as she's out of surgery." Elena heard every word. Through the reflection in the overhead surgical lamp, she could see his silhouette, could see him smile the way he used to smile at her. Except now he was smiling for someone else. Her obstetrician noticed her heart rate spike on the monitor. "Elena, I need you to stay calm," Dr. Chen said firmly. "Your blood pressure is rising. Think about your babies. Focus on your breathing." But Elena couldn't focus on anything except her husband's voice discussing their marriage like it was a failed business venture. 5 years together, 2 years of fertility treatments, 36 hours of labor. And Marcus was on the phone with his mistress while their daughters were being cut from her body. The anesthesiologist adjusted something in Elena's IV, and the world started to blur at the edges. She heard the first cry, then the second. Twin girls, just as the ultrasounds had promised. Through her tears and the haze of medication, she saw them briefly. 2 perfect, tiny humans with dark hair and wrinkled faces before they were whisked away to the warming tables. "Congratulations, Elena," Dr. Chen said warmly. 2 healthy girls, 6 pounds 2 ounces, and 5 pounds 8 ounces. They're perfect. Elena tried to speak, tried to ask about Marcus, tried to understand why this moment of joy felt like drowning, but the medication pulled her under into dreamless black. She woke in recovery 2 hours later to find Marcus sitting in the chair beside her bed, but he wasn't alone. A woman Elena had never seen before stood next to him, young and blonde, and wearing scrubs that suggested she worked in the hospital. The woman's hand rested on Marcus's shoulder with casual ownership. "You're awake," Marcus said, and his tone was the same one he used in business meetings when he was about to deliver bad news to investors. "Elena, we need to talk." "The babies," Elena croaked, her throat dry from intubation. "Where are my babies?" "They're in the NICU for observation. Routine for twins. They're fine." Marcus stood up and the blonde woman stepped back slightly, but not far enough to suggest she was leaving. "This is Vanessa Hartford. She's a surgical nurse here at St. Mary's, and we've been seeing each other for the past 8 months. 8 months. Elena's mind struggled to process the timeline. 8 months ago, she'd been 4 months pregnant, dealing with severe morning sickness and bed rest orders. 8 months ago, Marcus had started working late every night, claiming his medical device startup needed him for critical investor meetings. "I'm filing for divorce," Marcus continued, his voice clinical and detached. "I've already spoken with my attorney. Given your condition and the circumstances, I'm willing to be generous. You'll get the apartment in Queens, child support, of course, and a settlement of $200,000. I think that's more than fair." Elena stared at him, her mind foggy from anesthesia and shock. "You're divorcing me? Now? I just had surgery. Our daughters are 2 hours old." "I know the timing isn't ideal, but waiting would only make it harder." Marcus pulled papers from his briefcase, the same leather Hermes briefcase Elena had bought him for their 3rd anniversary. "I need you to sign these. My lawyer says we can have everything finalized in 60 days if there's no contesting." Are you insane? Elena's voice rose, and immediately a nurse appeared in the doorway, concerned. Get out! Get out of my room right now! Vanessa Hartford spoke for the first time, her voice sweet and sympathetic in a way that made Elena's skin crawl. Elena, I know this is difficult, but Marcus and I are in love. We're planning to get married as soon as your divorce is final. It would be so much easier on everyone, especially your daughters, if you could just be mature about this. The audacity of the statement hit Elena like a physical blow. This woman, this stranger who'd been sleeping with her husband while Elena was pregnant with his children, was now asking her to be mature? Get out, Elena repeated, her hand reaching for the call button. Both of you. Get out before I call security. Marcus sighed like she was being unreasonable. I'm going to leave these papers with you. Read them over. My lawyer's contact information is on page 3. I've already moved my things out of the apartment, so you don't need to worry about awkward encounters. I'll be in touch about visitation schedules once the girls are home from the hospital. After they left, Elena lay in her hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles and trying to understand how her life had imploded in the span of a few hours. She'd given birth to twin daughters. She should be feeling joy, overwhelming love, the fierce protective instinct everyone talked about. Instead, she felt numb and hollowed out, like someone had scooped out her insides and left only an empty shell. A different nurse entered, an older woman with kind eyes and graying hair. Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry about what just happened. That was completely inappropriate, and I've reported the incident to our patient advocate. Is there anyone I can call for you? Family or friends who should be here? Elena's mind went blank. Her parents had died in a car accident when she was 19. She had no siblings. Her grandmother, Lucia Martinez, had passed away 6 months ago at 94, taking with her the last connection to Elena's family history. Friends? Elena had let most of her friendships drift during the intense years of fertility treatments and the high-risk pregnancy. Marcus's startup had consumed so much of their life together that Elena's own career as an art curator had taken a back seat, and she'd lost touch with colleagues and college friends. No, Elena said quietly. There's no one to call. The nurse's expression shifted to something between pity and determination. Honey, I'm going to tell you something my mother told me when I left my no-good husband 30 years ago. Right now feels like the end of the world, but it's actually the beginning of the world figuring out what you're made of. You just gave birth to 2 babies. You survived that, and you'll survive this too. Thank you, Elena whispered, though she didn't believe it. How could she survive this? She had no job, no family, a tiny apartment in Queens that would barely fit 2 cribs, and less than $10,000 in her personal bank account. Marcus had been the primary earner with his startup, and Elena had been so focused on the pregnancy that she hadn't worked in almost a year. The nurse squeezed her hand. The girls are doing beautifully, by the way. Strong lungs, good color, eating well. They're fighters. They get that from their mama. After the nurse left, Elena reached for her phone with shaking hands. 17 missed calls, 12 text messages, but none from Marcus. All the calls were from unknown numbers, and when she checked the messages, her blood ran cold. They were from a law firm, Peterson and Associates, the same firm that had handled her grandmother's estate when she passed away. Elena had been too deep in her 3rd trimester to attend the final estate meetings, and her grandmother's lawyer had assured her everything was being handled according to Lucia's wishes. There would be time to review the details after the babies were born. The most recent message was time-stamped from 1 hour ago. Ms. Martinez, this is Rachel Peterson. It's urgent that we speak before you sign any legal documents. Your grandmother's estate has been fully settled, and there are significant assets that require your immediate attention. Please call me as soon as possible, regardless of the hour. Significant assets. Elena almost laughed. Her grandmother had lived in a modest, rent-controlled apartment in the Bronx for 40 years. She'd worked as a housekeeper for wealthy families, living simply and sending money back to relatives in Puerto Rico. What significant assets could there possibly be? But something in the lawyer's tone made Elena's finger hover over the callback button. It was nearly midnight, but the lawyer had said regardless of the hour. With her. Free hand, Elena touched her still numb abdomen, feeling the ridge of surgical tape over her incision. 2 hours ago, she'd become a mother. 2 hours ago, her husband had destroyed their family. What could possibly make this day any stranger? She pressed call. Rachel Peterson answered on the first ring. Miss Martinez, thank God. Are you somewhere private where we can talk? I'm in a hospital room. I just had a C-section. My husband just asked me for a divorce. Elena heard the hysteria creeping into her voice and forced herself to breathe. What's so urgent that it couldn't wait until morning? Because I just received a call from Marcus Chen's attorney indicating that you're about to sign divorce papers, and if you do that without understanding your financial position, you'll be making a catastrophic mistake. Elena's laugh was sharp and bitter. My financial position is pretty clear. I have about $10,000 in savings and a one-bedroom apartment in Queens. Marcus is offering me $200,000 in the settlement, which is honestly more generous than I expected. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long that Elena thought the call had dropped. Then Rachel Peterson said slowly, carefully, Miss Martinez, did your grandmother ever discuss the details of her estate with you? Did she ever mention where her family came from in Puerto Rico? She was from San Juan. She came to New York in the 1950s. She worked as a housekeeper. Elena frowned, confused by the direction of the questions. What does this have to do with my divorce? Your grandmother's full name was Lucia Esperanza Martinez Cordero. The Cordero family owned the largest pharmaceutical manufacturing company in Puerto Rico from 1920 until 1987, when it was sold to a German conglomerate for $800 million. Your grandmother was the sole surviving heir to that fortune. Elena stopped breathing. That's impossible. My grandmother lived in a tiny apartment. She worked cleaning houses until she was 80 years old. She didn't have money. She chose not to have money. Or rather, she chose to live simply while allowing her inheritance to grow in trust. When the company was sold in 1987, your grandmother was 43 years old and had recently lost her husband and only son, your father, in separate tragedies within the same year. She was devastated, and she walked away from the entire fortune, establishing a trust that would pass to her descendants upon her death. How much? Elena's voice was barely a whisper. How much money are we talking about? The trust, after 37 years of professional management and conservative investment growth, is currently valued at approximately $1.5 billion. You, Ms. Martinez, are the sole beneficiary. Your grandmother left everything to you, with specific instructions that the funds be used to ensure you and any children you might have would never have to depend on anyone for financial security. The hospital room seemed to tilt sideways. Elena gripped the bed rails, her knuckles white. $1.5 billion. The trust can't be touched by your husband in any divorce proceedings because it's a direct inheritance from your grandmother, completely separate from marital assets. But, Ms. Martinez, if you sign those divorce papers he gave you without proper legal representation, if you agree to his settlement offer, you'll be setting a precedent that could complicate things unnecessarily. You need to let me handle this properly. Elena looked down at the divorce papers Marcus had left on her bedside table. $200,000. An apartment in Queens. Child support. He'd presented it as generous, as more than fair for a woman who'd brought nothing to the marriage except herself. Except herself and $1.5 billion that neither of them had known existed. Ms. Martinez, are you still there? Yes, Elena said, and for the first time in hours her voice was steady. I'm here, and I'm not signing anything. What do I need to do? Rachel Peterson's smile was audible through the phone. First, you rest and recover from your surgery. Second, you meet your daughters and fall in love with them. Third, you let me handle Marcus Chen and his attorney. And fourth, Ms. Martinez, you prepare yourself for a very different conversation than the one your ex-husband thinks he's going to have. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. 3 days later, Elena sat in the hospital's private lactation room trying to nurse both twins simultaneously with the assistance of a patient NICU nurse who'd shown her the football hold position. Sophia and Isabella, the names Elena had chosen from her grandmother's family tree, were finally strong enough to room in with her, and the simple act of holding them both, feeling their tiny mouths working instinctively, filled Elena with a fierce, protective love that made everything else fade into background noise. Almost everything else. Marcus had called twice, both times leaving voicemails asking if she'd reviewed the divorce papers. He hadn't asked about the babies. Hadn't asked how Elena was recovering from major abdominal surgery. Just wanted to know about the papers, about his timeline, about his ability to move forward with his life and his plans with Vanessa. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Rachel Peterson. Meeting scheduled for tomorrow at 10 a.m. at my office. Your grandmother's trust documents and my initial divorce filing are ready for your review. Also, I took the liberty of running a background check on Marcus Chen. You're going to want to see what I found. The lactation consultant helped Elena burp both babies, their tiny bodies warm and impossibly fragile against her chest. You're doing great, Mama, the woman said kindly. These girls are lucky to have you. Elena looked down at her daughters, at their dark hair and miniature fingers, and the way they'd already figured out how to grip her thumbs with surprising strength. Lucky. Were they lucky to have a mother whose husband had abandoned them hours after their birth? Lucky to be entering a world where their father had already chosen someone else. But they would be lucky in other ways. They would never wonder if they could afford good schools or health care or opportunities. They would never feel the financial desperation that had driven Elena's grandmother to clean other people's houses. They would never have to depend on a man who could walk away at the first sign of inconvenience. Her phone buzzed again, this time a call from an unknown number. Elena answered carefully. Hello? Mrs. Chen? This is Detective Sarah Morrison with the NYPD Financial Crimes Unit. I'm calling because your name came up in an investigation we've been conducting, and I need to ask you some questions about your husband's company, Chen Medical Innovations. Elena's stomach dropped. What kind of investigation? Securities fraud, embezzlement, and investor fraud. We've been building a case for 6 months, and your husband is our primary suspect. Mrs. Chen, I know you just gave birth, and I apologize for the timing, but I need to know what you know about how Chen Medical Innovations has been using investor money. I don't know anything, Elena said honestly. Marcus never discussed business details with me. I was an art curator before I got pregnant. I don't know anything about medical devices or funding or any of it. Did you ever sign any financial documents for the company? Tax forms, loan applications, corporate filings? Elena thought back, her mind foggy. Maybe. I signed things Marcus put in front of me sometimes. He said it was normal that spouses co-sign certain business documents for tax purposes. The detective was quiet for a moment. Mrs. Chen, I'm going to need you to come in for a formal interview once you're released from the hospital. And I strongly suggest you get an attorney who specializes in white-collar crime. If your husband used your identity or signature on fraudulent documents, you could be facing criminal exposure. After the detective hung up, Elena sat in the lactation room holding her sleeping daughters, her mind racing. Marcus wasn't just leaving her for another woman. He was leaving her potentially holding the bag for federal crimes. He'd positioned her as a cosigner, a name on documents she hadn't understood, while he ran his company into the ground with investor money that might have been stolen or misused. The next morning, Elena checked out of the hospital with both twins secured in their car seats, the hospital social worker helping arrange a car service since Elena couldn't drive yet after her C-section. The discharge nurse handed her a thick folder of post-operative instructions, feeding schedules, and pediatrician appointments, along with a smaller envelope that had been delivered to the nurse's station that morning. Inside was a handwritten note on expensive stationery. Elena, I heard about Marcus. I'm so sorry. If you need anything, call me. You were always too good for him anyway. Amanda Richardson. Amanda Richardson. Marcus's ex-girlfriend from business school. The one he'd briefly dated before meeting Elena. They'd stayed friendly, running in the same startup circles, occasionally grabbing coffee when Amanda was in New York from her venture capital job in San Francisco. Elena had always liked Amanda's straightforward personality and sharp business mind, though Marcus had made subtle jokes about Amanda being too aggressive, too ambitious, too much for most men to handle. Elena tucked the note into her diaper bag and focused on getting herself and two newborns into the car without crying from the pain of moving her still healing abdomen. The car service driver, a kind, older man from Bangladesh, helped load the car seats and asked gentle questions about the babies that made Elena's throat tight with unexpected emotion. My wife and I have 5 daughters, he said with obvious pride. All grown now, all successful. Girls are strong. They fight harder than boys, work smarter, love deeper. Your daughters will do great things. By the time they reached Rachel Peterson's law office in Midtown, Elena felt like she'd run a marathon. The building was nothing like she expected. Instead of a modest office in a converted brownstone, the address led to one of Manhattan's most prestigious skyscrapers, and Peterson and Associates occupied the entire 47th floor. The receptionist took one look at Elena with 2 newborns in car seats and immediately offered help. Ms. Martinez, we've prepared a private room for you with everything you might need. Ms. Peterson thought you'd be more comfortable if you could feed and change the babies in privacy. The private room turned out to be a full nursery, complete with changing table, rocking chair, bottles of prepared formula in case Elena needed them, and even a bassinet if the twins needed to sleep during the meeting. Elena felt tears prick her eyes at the thoughtfulness. Rachel Peterson appeared in the doorway, a striking woman in her mid-50s with silver-streaked dark hair and an expression that suggested she'd seen every dirty trick in the book and knew how to counter all of them. Ms. Martinez, congratulations on your beautiful daughters. I'm so glad you're here. Over the next 2 hours, while Elena nursed and burped and changed diapers, Rachel laid out the full scope of Elena's inheritance and the strategic approach they'd take to the divorce. Your grandmother was a remarkable woman, Rachel said, pulling up documents on her tablet. After she lost your grandfather and your father in 1987, she had what I can only describe as a spiritual crisis. She'd grown up wealthy in Puerto Rico, but watching her family's fortune couldn't prevent the tragedies that destroyed her life, made her question everything. She walked away from it all, moved to the Bronx, and started over as a housekeeper. But why keep it secret? Elena asked, adjusting Isabella, who'd fallen asleep mid-feeding. Why not tell me? I could have helped her. She didn't have to work so hard. Because she didn't want money to define you the way it had defined her early life. She wanted you to grow up understanding the value of work, of relationships, of building something meaningful beyond wealth. But she also wanted to make sure you'd never be trapped by poverty or dependence. Rachel pulled up a photograph from the trust documents. This is from your grandmother's instructions, written when you were 15 years old. The photograph showed a younger Lucia, probably in her 60s, standing in front of a modest church. Below the image, handwritten text read, "My Elena is strong and kind and smart. She will build a good life through her own efforts. But when I am gone, she will also have the freedom to choose her own path without fear. Money is not happiness, but freedom from money worries is a gift I can give her." Elena wiped tears from her cheeks, careful not to wake the baby in her arms. I miss her so much. She left you detailed letters, Rachel said gently. Dozens of them, all sealed and dated for specific occasions. Your 25th birthday, your 30th, your wedding day, the birth of your first child. She wanted to be part of your major life moments even after she was gone. Can I read the one for the twins' birth? Rachel handed her an envelope sealed with old-fashioned wax dated 6 months before Lucia's death. Elena opened it carefully, and her grandmother's familiar handwriting swam before her eyes. My dearest Elena, if you're reading this, then I am gone, and you have become a mother. What a joy that would have been to see. I pray that motherhood brings you the same fierce love I felt for your father, and that your children grow up knowing they are cherished. I also pray that whoever you chose to build a family with is worthy of you. But Elena, mi amor, if he is not, do not stay for the children's sake. Children need to see their mother strong and whole, not diminished by a man who doesn't recognize her value. You have the resources now to walk away from anything that makes you small. Use them. Be brave. Show your daughters what a strong woman looks like. Rachel gave her time to compose herself before continuing with business. Now, regarding Marcus Chen, I've done extensive research on his company and his personal finances, and Ms. Martinez, your ex-husband is in serious trouble. A detective called me yesterday about securities fraud. I'm aware. Chen Medical Innovations has been operating as essentially a Ponzi scheme for the past 18 months. Marcus was bringing in new investors to pay returns to old investors while burning through actual capital on personal expenses. The company has no viable products, no real revenue stream, and millions in debt. The SEC and FBI are both investigating, and the indictment is likely coming within the next 60 days. Elena felt sick. And he had me sign documents. The detective said I could be criminally exposed. That's where this gets interesting, Rachel said, a sharp smile crossing her face. Because I pulled those documents through a legal discovery request yesterday. And Elena, your husband, forged your signature on at least 30% of them. We have handwriting analysis that proves it. He used your identity without your knowledge or consent. So I'm not in trouble? Not only are you not in trouble, but we have leverage. Marcus Chen committed identity theft and fraud using his pregnant wife's identity while carrying on an affair with a hospital employee. The optics alone would destroy him in any divorce proceeding, but combined with the criminal exposure, he's going to be very motivated to give you whatever you want. I don't want anything from him, Elena said quietly. I have my grandmother's money. I don't need his. Rachel leaned forward. This isn't about the money, Elena. This is about making sure Marcus Chen understands that he made the worst mistake of his life when he served you divorce papers in a recovery room. This is about ensuring he knows exactly who he walked away from and what it's going to cost him. What do you mean? I mean, we're going to file for divorce on your terms. Full custody of the twins with supervised visitation for Marcus. Child support based on his theoretical earning capacity, not his actual imploding company. And a full forensic accounting of every asset he has, including his stake in Chen Medical Innovations, which we will then freeze as part of the marital asset division. But the company is worthless. You just said it's a fraud. It's worthless now, Rachel agreed. But Marcus has convinced investors it's worth $200 million on paper. We're going to claim half of that paper value in the divorce, which means Marcus can't sell his shares or negotiate with creditors without our approval. We're essentially going to make it impossible for him to escape his sinking ship. Elena looked down at her sleeping daughters, thinking about her grandmother's words. Show your daughters what a strong woman looks like. What about Vanessa Hartford, the woman he left me for? Rachel's smile turned predatory. Oh, Ms. Hartford is about to have a very bad week. Because it turns out that hospital employees aren't supposed to engage in romantic relationships with patients' family members during active treatment. It's a violation of St. Mary's ethics policy. I've already filed a complaint with the hospital's patient advocate office, and Vanessa Hartford is currently on administrative suspension pending investigation. I don't want to ruin her life. You're not ruining anything. She made her choices. She chose to sleep with a married man whose wife was a patient at her hospital. She chose to show up in that recovery room to flaunt her relationship. Now she gets to live with the consequences of those choices. Over the next hour, Rachel walked Elena through the financial structure of her inheritance. The trust was complex, designed to protect the assets from taxation, lawsuits, and any potential creditors. Elena had complete control over the funds, but they were structured in ways that made them nearly impossible to lose through bad investments or legal judgments. Your grandmother was very smart about this, Rachel explained. She knew that sudden wealth could destroy people as easily as poverty could, so she built in protections. You can't spend more than 5% of the trust's value in any single year without approval from the trust's advisory board. The principal is invested conservatively to ensure it grows over time. And there are provisions to ensure your children and grandchildren will inherit the same protections. 5% of $1.5 billion, Elena calculated slowly. That's $75 million a year. Exactly, which means you'll never need Marcus Chen or anyone else for financial support. You can raise your daughters anywhere you want, doing anything you want, without ever worrying about money again. Elena felt the weight of it settling on her shoulders. She'd gone from having $10,000 and a one-bedroom apartment to having access to wealth she couldn't fully comprehend. I don't know what to do with that much money. You'll learn. Your grandmother left you a team of advisors, financial managers, lawyers, and philanthropic consultants. She wanted to make sure you had guidance. But Elena, the most important thing is this. Rachel pulled out one final document. Your grandmother established a foundation in your name when you were born, the Lucia Martinez Foundation for Women's Independence. It's been operating quietly for 30 years, funding programs for domestic violence survivors, single mothers, women escaping poverty. Your grandmother seeded it with $50 million, and it's grown to $200 million in assets. She did all this without ever telling me? She wanted you to discover it when you needed it most, when you were strong enough to handle it and vulnerable enough to understand why it mattered. Rachel slid the foundation documents across the table. You're the president and chairwoman of the board. What you do with it is up to you. Elena spent the next 3 days in her small Queens apartment, figuring out how to care for 2 newborns while processing the complete transformation of her life. The apartment felt different now, knowing she could leave it anytime she wanted. The hand-me-down cribs and second-hand baby clothes felt different, knowing she could buy anything her daughters needed. But mostly, Elena felt different. The woman Marcus had served with divorce papers, the woman who'd felt helpless and abandoned in that hospital bed, was gone. In her place was someone harder, sharper, more certain of her worth. Marcus called on the 4th day. Elena, we need to talk about those divorce papers. My lawyer says you haven't signed them yet, and this is starting to get expensive. I'm trying to be fair here. Fair? Elena's laugh was sharp. You want to talk about fair? The detective from the Financial Crimes Unit wants to talk to me about your company, Marcus, about the documents you forged with my signature, about the investors you defrauded while I was pregnant with your children. The silence on the other end of the line was profound. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. And my attorney knows about it too. We filed for divorce on my terms, and you're going to receive the papers this afternoon. Full custody of the twins, supervised visitation, child support, and 50% of all marital assets, including your stake in Chen Medical Innovations. You can't do that. The prenup you had me sign when I was 24 and had no lawyer review? The one that was based on fraudulent representation of both our assets? That prenup? Elena felt a surge of satisfaction at the panic in his voice. Marcus, you made a lot of assumptions about who I was and what I'd accept. You were wrong about all of them. Elena, please. Be reasonable. The company is in trouble. I need to be able to negotiate with investors and creditors. If you claim half my shares, I can't do that. You'll destroy everything I've built. You've destroyed everything you built, Marcus. I'm just making sure you can't rebuild it on the backs of people you've defrauded. Elena looked at her daughters, both sleeping peacefully in their cribs. You get supervised visitation with Sophia and Isabella. 1 day a week, 4 hours, with a court-approved monitor present. And you pay child support of $10,000 per month. $10,000? That's insane. I don't have that kind of money. Then you should have thought about that before you served your wife divorce papers 2 hours after she had major surgery. Elena's voice was ice. You wanted a divorce, Marcus. Congratulations. You're getting one. Just not on your terms. She hung up before he could respond, her hands shaking but her resolve firm. The phone rang again immediately, but she let it go to voicemail. Whatever Marcus had to say, whatever threats or pleading or manipulation he'd try, Elena was done listening. That evening, Rachel Peterson called with an update. Marcus's attorney called. They want to negotiate. They're claiming the child support amount is excessive and the custody arrangement is punitive. And what did you tell them? I told them that Elena Martinez is no longer the powerless pregnant woman Marcus Chen tried to discard. I told them that my client has resources and resolve, and that if they want to fight this in court, we'll be happy to. Present evidence of Marcus's fraud, his forgery, his affair with a hospital employee, and his complete abdication of parental responsibility. Rachel's satisfaction was audible. They're requesting a settlement conference next week. I want Vanessa Hartford there, Elena said suddenly. I want Marcus's mistress to sit in that room and watch while we dismantle his life the same way he tried to dismantle mine. Elena, that's not standard procedure. Make it happen, Rachel. Please. I want her to see what happens when you underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The settlement conference took place in Rachel Peterson's offices, in a conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Marcus arrived with his attorney, a nervous young man who'd clearly already realized his client was radioactive. Vanessa Hartford came separately, her blonde hair pulled back and her face carefully blank, though Elena could see the tension in her shoulders. Elena sat at the head of the table, flanked by Rachel on one side and her grandmother's trust administrator on the other. She'd dressed carefully for this meeting, not in the casual clothes of new motherhood, but in an elegant black suit that emphasized her returning figure and the diamond pendant her grandmother had left her. A simple but exquisite piece worth more than Marcus's entire yearly salary. "Thank you all for coming," Rachel began smoothly. "We're here to discuss the dissolution of the marriage between Elena Martinez and Marcus Chen, as well as custody arrangements for their minor children, Sophia and Isabella Chen Martinez." Marcus's attorney cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to be generous. We're offering Mrs. Chen $400,000 in settlement, the Queen's apartment, and shared custody of the children with a flexible visitation schedule." "Countered," Rachel said without hesitation. "Ms. Martinez seeks full physical and legal custody of both children, supervised visitation for Mr. Chen, child support of $10,000 monthly, and 50% of all marital assets, including Mr. Chen's stake in Chen Medical Innovations." "That's absurd," Marcus burst out. "The company is worth millions. Elena, you'd be taking half of everything I built." Elena spoke for the first time, her voice calm and clear. "Marcus, the company is worth nothing. It's a house of cards built on investor fraud, and you know it. The FBI knows it. The SEC knows it. And in about 6 weeks, when you're indicted, everyone will know it." Vanessa Hartford shifted uncomfortably, glancing at Marcus. "You said the company was successful. You said you were about to close a major funding round." "He lied," Elena said, meeting the other woman's eyes directly. "He lied to investors. He lied to me. He lied to you. Marcus Chen is a fraud, Vanessa, and you hitched your wagon to a sinking ship." "This is completely inappropriate," Marcus's attorney protested. "My client's business affairs are separate from this divorce proceeding." "Are they?" Rachel slid a document across the table. "Because this is a list of marital assets purchased with funds from Chen Medical Innovations. The Mercedes Marcus drives, the vacation home in the Hamptons, the country club membership, all purchased with investor money that Marcus represented as personal income. All marital assets subject to division." Marcus's face had gone pale. "Elena, please, don't do this. I'll agree to the custody arrangement, but you have to let me keep control of the company. I need to be able to negotiate my way out of this." "Why would I help you?" Elena asked, genuinely curious. "You left me on an operating table, Marcus. You brought your mistress to meet our daughters when they were 2 hours old. You tried to steal my identity to hide your crimes. Give me one reason why I should make any of this easier for you." The silence that followed was broken by Vanessa Hartford standing abruptly. "I need to leave. This is between the two of you." "Actually, you might want to stay," Rachel said pleasantly, "because there's the matter of the ethics complaint filed against you with St. Mary's Hospital. Engaging in a romantic relationship with a patient's family member during active treatment is a serious violation. The hospital board is meeting tomorrow to discuss your employment status." Vanessa's face went white. "You can't do this. You can't ruin my career because your husband fell in love with someone else." Elena stood slowly, using the full force of her height and presence. "I'm not ruining anything, Vanessa. You ruined your own career when you chose to sleep with a married man whose wife was your patient. You ruined it when you showed up in my recovery room to gloat while I was still drugged from surgery. And you're going to keep ruining it as long as you think other people's consequences don't apply to you. This is insane, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Elena, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this isn't the woman I married. You're right, Elena agreed. The woman you married was someone who didn't know her own worth. Someone who thought she needed you. Someone who would accept crumbs and call it generosity. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a folder, sliding it across the table to Marcus. This is the woman I actually am. Marcus opened the folder, and Elena watched his face drain of all color as he read the first page. The trust documents, the inheritance statement, the full accounting of Elena's new financial position. $1.5 billion, give or take a few million depending on market conditions. This is a joke, he whispered. This can't be real. It's very real, Rachel confirmed. Ms. Martinez's grandmother was Lucia Esperanza Martinez Cordero, sole heir to the Cordero pharmaceutical fortune. Elena is her only living descendant and the beneficiary of a trust that's been growing for 37 years. Your wife, Mr. Chen, is a billionaire, and you served her divorce papers while she was recovering from a C-section because you thought she was a nobody. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. Vanessa Hartford had started crying, quiet tears that ruined her carefully applied makeup. Marcus just stared at the documents, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't know, he finally managed. Elena, I swear I didn't know. If you had known, you never would have left me, Elena finished. Because you're not actually in love with Vanessa, Marcus. You're in love with the idea of trading up, of improving your position. You thought you were leaving a poor art curator for a pretty nurse, upgrading to someone who'd be more impressive to your investor friends. But if you'd known I had money, you would have stayed. Not because you loved me, but because you loved what I could do for you. That's not fair. None of this is fair, Marcus. Elena gathered her things, preparing to leave. But here's what's going to happen. You're going to sign the custody agreement giving me full physical custody with supervised visitation. You're going to pay the child support I've requested. And you're going to sign over your half of the Queen's apartment, which I'm going to donate to the Lucia Martinez Foundation to be used as transitional housing for single mothers. And my company? Your company is going to implode in the next few weeks regardless of what I do. The FBI has enough evidence to indict you without my cooperation. But Marcus, if you fight me on custody, if you try to drag this divorce out, I will testify about every document you had me sign, every signature you forged, every lie you told investors. I will make sure you spend the maximum possible time in federal prison. Marcus's attorney leaned over to whisper urgently in his ear. After a moment, Marcus nodded slowly. What do you want me to do? I want you to sign the papers, Marcus. All of them. Today. And then I want you to disappear from my life except for the 4 hours a week you get to spend with your daughters under supervision. Elena's voice softened slightly. I don't hate you, Marcus. I just don't want to waste any more energy on someone who threw me away like garbage. 2 hours later, Elena walked out of Peterson and Associates with signed divorce papers, full custody of her daughters, and the beginning of a new life. Marcus had agreed to everything, his attorney clearly having explained that fighting a billionaire who had evidence of your crimes was a losing proposition. Vanessa Hartford had left without saying goodbye, though Rachel had heard through channels that she'd already been terminated from St. Mary's pending the ethics investigation. The hospital couldn't afford the liability of keeping an employee who'd violated patient trust in such a spectacular fashion. Elena's phone buzzed with a text from Amanda Richardson. "Heard you divorced Marcus. Want to grab coffee and talk about how you should spend your newfound wealth? I have ideas." Elena smiled, typing back, "Coffee sounds perfect, but I'm bringing 2 tiny chaperones. Fair warning, they're loud and demanding." "Even better. I'll bring investment prospectuses and my best nanny recommendations. Welcome to the world of being a rich single mom, Elena. It's going to be amazing." The next 6 months passed in a blur of late-night feedings, diaper changes, and slowly learning how to manage wealth beyond anything Elena had ever imagined. The Lucia Martinez Foundation expanded its programs, opening 3 new shelters for domestic violence survivors and funding college scholarships for single mothers. Elena hired a team to help her, a nanny for overnight shifts so she could sleep, a housekeeper who became like family, a driver who helped her navigate the city with 2 infants. She bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, gutting and renovating it to be accessible and beautiful, with a nursery that overlooked a private garden and enough space for her daughters to grow. She left the Queen's apartment behind without regret, signing it over to the foundation just as she'd promised. Marcus's indictment came down in March, just as Elena's daughters were learning to hold their heads up and smile. Securities fraud, wire fraud, investor fraud, identity theft. He was looking at 15 to 20 years in federal prison, and his attorney was already negotiating a plea deal. Vanessa Hartford had disappeared from social media entirely, though Elena heard through the grapevine that she'd moved back to Iowa to live with her parents. Elena felt no satisfaction in their downfall. She felt only a quiet certainty that justice had been served, that consequences had caught up with people who'd thought they were above them. In May, Elena received a visit from Amanda Richardson, who'd flown in from San Francisco specifically to propose a business venture. They sat in Elena's new living room while Sophia and Isabella practiced tummy time on a blanket, occasionally squawking for attention. "I want to start a venture capital fund focused on women-led startups," Amanda said, pulling up a presentation on her tablet. "I've been in this industry for 15 years, and I'm tired of watching brilliant women get passed over for funding because they don't fit some bro culture ideal. But I need a partner with serious capital and connections. I need you, Elena. I don't know anything about venture capital. You don't need to. I know venture capital. You know art, culture, human nature, what makes something valuable beyond just profit margins. That's actually more important." Amanda leaned forward, her enthusiasm infectious. "Elena, we could change the entire landscape of startup funding. We could make it possible for women like us, women who've been underestimated, to build empires of their own." Elena looked down at her daughters, thinking about the world they'd grow up in. "How much capital would you need?" "For a proper fund that would make waves? Minimum $250 million. "Done," Elena said simply. "Draw up the papers. But I want the fund named after my grandmother, the Lucia Martinez Venture Fund. And I want part of our mission to include mentorship programs for women entrepreneurs who don't have access to traditional networks." Amanda's grin was enormous. "Have I mentioned lately that I'm really glad Marcus was stupid enough to leave you?" By the time Sophia and Isabella celebrated their first birthday, Elena had transformed from an abandoned wife into a force in New York's philanthropic and business communities. The Lucia Martinez Venture Fund had already invested in 12 women-led startups, 3 of which were showing exceptional promise. The foundation had opened 7 shelters and helped 340 women and children escape dangerous situations. And Elena had found herself again. Not the woman who'd tried to make herself smaller for Marcus's comfort. Not the uncertain art curator who doubted her own value, but someone new and stronger and infinitely more capable than she'd ever imagined. Marcus sent letters from prison sometimes, asking about the girls, apologizing for his choices. Elena responded with brief updates and photos, but kept strict boundaries. He would be eligible for parole in 7 years if he behaved himself. By then, Sophia and Isabella would be 8 years old enough to decide for themselves if they wanted a relationship with their father. On the twins' first birthday, Elena stood in her garden while they smashed cake into their faces and squealed with delight, surrounded by friends she'd made through the foundation and the venture fund. Amanda was there, Rachel Peterson, the trust administrators who'd become trusted advisors, even the nanny and housekeeper who'd become family. Her phone buzzed with a notification, and Elena glanced down to see an email from Rachel. Marcus Chen's attorney just contacted me. Marcus wants to give up his parental rights entirely in exchange for being released from child support obligations. He's getting remarried to someone he met in prison ministry classes. Shall I tell him what he can do with his request? Elena looked at her daughters, at Sophia's determined grip on a fistful of frosting, and Isabella's delighted laughter as cake went everywhere. They would grow up knowing their mother was strong enough to build empires. They would never doubt their worth or accept less than they deserved. They would carry their great-grandmother's legacy forward into a world that desperately needed women who knew their power. Tell him yes, Elena typed back. Tell him, I'll waive child support in exchange for complete termination of parental rights. And Rachel, make sure it's ironclad. I don't want him coming back in 10 years trying to reconnect because he's found religion or had an epiphany. My daughters deserve better than a part-time father who couldn't be bothered to show up. 3 months later, Elena sat in a courtroom while a judge reviewed the termination papers. Marcus was there via video conference from federal prison, looking gaunt and older than his 38 years. He'd agreed to everything, signed everything, eliminated himself from his daughters' lives as thoroughly as he'd tried to eliminate Elena. Mr. Chen, the judge said sternly, do you understand that by terminating your parental rights you are giving up all claims to these children? You will not be their father legally, financially, or in any other capacity. You cannot change your mind later. This is permanent. I understand, Your Honor, Marcus said quietly. It's better this way. They deserve better than me. For the first time in years, Elena felt something almost like pity for him. He'd traded everything that mattered for things that didn't, and now he was living with the consequences. But the pity was fleeting, replaced by relief. Her daughters would grow up without the confusion of a father who couldn't decide if they were worth his time. As Elena left the courthouse, her phone rang. Amanda Richardson, calling from a startup pitch competition they were sponsoring in Seattle. Elena, you need to hear this pitch. There's a woman here who's developed an AI system for predicting pregnancy complications. It could save thousands of lives. She's brilliant. She's driven. And she's being passed over by every traditional VC because they think the market's too niche. How much does she need? 10 million for Series A? Approved. Send me the details. Elena smiled, thinking of all the women who'd benefit from technology that could prevent the kind of crisis she'd experienced. And Amanda, let's set up a meeting with her. I want to hear about her vision directly. This, Elena thought, was what her grandmother had really given her. Not just money, but the power to change lives, to support women who were building solutions to real problems, to make sure the next generation had better tools and more opportunities. That night, as Elena rocked her daughters to sleep in their Brooklyn brownstone, she thought about the woman she'd been a year ago, terrified, alone, recovering from surgery while her husband walked away. That woman had believed she had nothing. She'd been wrong. She'd had everything that mattered: strength, resilience, a legacy of women who'd survived worse and built better. The money just made it easier to share those gifts with others who needed them. "Your great-grandmother was an extraordinary woman," Elena whispered to Sophia and Isabella as they drifted off to sleep. "She cleaned houses and raised a family and built an empire in secret. She did it all so you could have choices she never had, so you could be anything you wanted to be without ever having to depend on someone who didn't deserve you." Both babies were asleep now, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect synchronization. Elena stood carefully, tucking blankets around them with the fierce love of a mother who'd fought for every moment of peace they had. Tomorrow she'd meet with architects about converting an old warehouse into a business incubator for women entrepreneurs. Next week she'd speak at a conference about funding equity for female founders. Next month, she'd celebrate the foundation's expansion into 3 new cities. But tonight, Elena just stood in her daughter's nursery and felt the full weight of her grandmother's gift settling comfortably on her shoulders. Not just wealth, but purpose. Not just money, but the freedom to use it in ways that mattered. Marcus Chen had thought he was divorcing a nobody. Instead, he'd freed a woman who was about to change the world. One investment, one shelter, one supported entrepreneur at a time. And somewhere, Elena was certain, Lucia Martinez-Cordero was smiling. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.